Hi, and welcome to That's Ready Mysterious. Join me for an intriguing look into real-life mysteries. Who was the mad gasser of Mattoon? What was whaling at the Wilga waterhole? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sreadymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about the portrait of Lord Cornbury. Lady Teresa Lister wrote of Lord Cornbury, Edward Hyde, 3rd Earl of Clarendon, presents one of those melancholy instances which too often occur amongst the descendants of distinguished men, where the name, the honors, the titles are reproduced, but unsupported and ungraced by any of those qualities or virtues which won distinction for their ancestors. His conduct through life was a blot upon his name, and brought down upon him the scorn and reproach of two hemispheres. The portrait of Lord Cornbury is an early 18th century painting that currently hangs in the New York Historical Society. The portrait was believed by many historians to have been of Lord Cornbury dressed in woman's clothing. Some others thought it was painted as a mockery of him. Now it's believed to not have been a painting of Lord Cornbury at all. Edward Hyde, Lord Cornbury, was born on November 28, 1661. He died on March 31, 1724. Edward was the only child of Henry Hyde, 2nd Earl of Clarendon, with his first wife, Theodosia. Edward's mother died when he was young. From the age of 5, Edward lived at Swallowfield Park in Berkshire, the home of his father's new wife, Flower. Later in life, Edward joined the Royal Regiment of Dragons, one of the oldest cavalry regiments in British Army history, as a lieutenant colonel. He became a colonel 2 years later. Edward served as page of honor at the coronation of his uncle, King James II. That same year, he was elected as the Tory MP for Wiltshire. Edward held that seat for 10 years, although in 1688 he briefly did not serve. That was the year of the Glorious Revolution, which was a revolution against King James II. Edward became one of the first commanders to leave King James, and he took as many troops with him as possible. Thomas Babington Macaulay, English poet, historian, and Whig politician, described Edward as a young man of slender abilities, loose principles, and violent temper. William III, the next King of England, rewarded Edward for deserting King James by making him Cornbury Captain General and Governor-in-Chief of both New York and New Jersey in 1701. Lord Cornbury arrived in New York on May 2, 1702. He was excitedly received, which was probably the high point of his rule. It was all downhill from there. Lord Cornbury was Baron of Cornbury and Earl of Clarendon. He was corrupt and hated the colonies. He was supposedly the worst British governor in America. He allegedly took bribes, embezzled from the public treasury, and was said to have spent half his time dressed as a woman. It was believed he spent too much money on candles and firewood for 2 colonial garrisons. He built a pleasure house on the Governor's Island, and he had huge personal debts. Lord Cornbury's political enemies called him a half-witted drunken fool, a tyrant, embezzler, and unfit as governor. He was eventually removed from his office. While still ruling over New York and New Jersey, Lord Cornbury liked to be called His High Mightiness. People accused Lord Cornbury of dressing in women's clothing both in private and in public. He supposedly opened the 1702 session of the New York Assembly dressed as Queen Anne. When questioned about his garb, Cornbury was said to have replied, "You are all very stupid people not to see the propriety of it all. In this place and occasion I represent a woman, the Queen, and in all respects I ought to represent her as faithfully as I can." It was also said that he was dressed in women's clothing when his wife died and was carried out of their home in the fort. This was said to be not privately but in the face of the sun in sight of the town. He was also said to have attended her funeral dressed in women's clothing. Some historians believe these claims were just intended to discredit Cornbury. The claims were all made by 3 American colonists that opposed Cornbury. He didn't allegedly just dress in women's clothing, but he was also claimed to have lurked behind trees to pounce, shrieking with laughter on his victims, all while dressed in women's clothing. The claims against Lord Cornbury were an example of early discussions surrounding cross-dressing. Portrait of an Unidentified Woman, as the painting is now called, was believed to have been painted of Lord Cornbury dressed in women's clothing, or was painted to mock him, but even that may not be true. The painting features a woman wearing a blue dress and white gloves. Her face has blushed cheeks. Part of the reason the portrait was believed to have been painted of Lord Cornbury is that the woman in the painting appears to have a 5 o'clock shadow. The Dallas Museum of Art called the painting a painted example of historical slander. There is not much contemporary evidence that Lord Cornbury dressed as a woman. The idea was mostly based on rumor and was done allegedly to symbolize his authority as the Queen's representative. In February of 1707, Lewis Morris suggested replacing Cornbury. He wrote of his proposed replacement, "He is an honest man and the reverse of my Lord Cornbury, of whom I must say something which perhaps nobody will think worth their while to tell, and that is, his dressing publicly in women's clothes every day, and putting a stop to all public business while he is pleasing himself with that particular but detestable maggart caprice." In 1708, Lord Cornbury was recalled from New York and immediately imprisoned by his creditors. He stayed in jail until the death of his father allowed him to be released. He was imprisoned for about 17 months. Lord Cornbury had 5 children, all but one predeceasing him. Who was the subject of the Portrait of an Unidentified Woman? Is the painting of a woman, or of Lord Cornbury dressed as a woman? What do you think? Leave a comment and let me know what you think. Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ready Mysterious. Join me next week for another captivating mystery.